Them lines are long too today.
They are.
As predicted.
I think my
I'm really
parents went.
impressed with the Bethlehem Center line.
Is it real long too?
Oh yeah, man, it's around the corner. I drove by there this morning as it was opening, and man, it must have been 100 people in line before it opened. And then I went back through there. It was like right around near the playground.
That's
Okay,
good.
Nicole, it's 1:30. You want to go ahead and take us? Oh, Lydia, you're the host now.
We're live.
Take it. Okay. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Tuesday, November the 3rd agenda session. I now call this meeting to order. Could I have approval of the minutes, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, with no objections, the minutes will stand as recorded. Under resolutions, I think we went over this 7A last week, did we not?
Yes, we did,
Chair?
sir. We've actually talked about it the past couple of weeks.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about this? If not, we'll move on. Same thing with Public Works and Transportation. We covered items B, C, D, and E all last week in our committee by Councilman Mitchell. Any questions or comments? Councilman Gilbert?
Yeah, I got one on B.
B?
Yes. It says something about it has a 5-year, 1-year contract, but then after that, it has a 1-year renewal option for professional. What's the options?
Mr. Attorney, can you answer that, or we need to bring in?
I will give you my
Mr.
best
Payne.
shot, but you may need to have the Public Works folks.
Okay.
As I understood the 5 1-year blankets, there were 5 different vendors. So that was the reason for the 5 1 years. And then it subject to 3 1-year renewal options. I'm not sure exactly how that worked.
Let me, Miss Lydia, bring in Bill Payne, please.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Payne.
Yes,
Did you hear Councilman Gilbert's question?
I apologize. As I was joining, he'd already finished his question, and I was hearing
Okay.
part of Councilman or Councilor Noblet's response.
Okay, Councilman Gilbert, would you repeat your question, sir?
1-year renewal option for professional services. What is the option?
That is an option. It is an option that if it's the same language as is used on all of these professional services contracts. That if the company chooses to wants to continue providing those services to the city, and if the city wants to continue contracting with them for those services, then that's an option that can be entered into if both parties agree.
So why is it 3 years instead of a 5-year then?
Our current all of the current blankets, that's what we've been requesting, has been our intention is to do qualifications. We solicit for qualifications every 3 years, and then we do 1-year contracts in between the request for qualifications. We have in the past those were at 5-year intervals for requesting qualifications, but it's been reduced to 3 years in probably the last year or two. They've generally been the new rebids or the new solicitations for those qualifications have typically requested them for a 3-year period.
So the qualifications of the company or qualifications of what?
Yes, professional services are not done on a bid basis under state law. They're required to be awarded based on the qualifications of the vendors and the consultants. And so it's a solicitation of their qualifications to perform the professional services that we've requested. And so we request those Currently, we're requesting those on a 3-year interval. So once every 3 years. What that means is once every 3 years, additional consultants who may not be on the current contract have the opportunity to submit their qualifications at that time.
So instead of 5 years, you put it on 3 years. Could it be on a 5-year in the future?
It could be, but those were questions that I know in the past when we had brought 5-year contracts to council, there were questions about how could another vendor get on the contract in between the cycle. And so after discussion and review with purchasing and in light of those comments, both from the consulting community as well as from council members as well, we had reduced it down to a 3-year contract.
Yeah, I understand that part. I was saying put the option on a 5-year. So anybody after a year is over, they can apply for the same thing.
Well, in order to do that, we would have to resolicit for qualifications every year because currently the option is only a renewal option with the companies that have submitted. So in order to be able to bring companies, in order to be able to bring companies on, for example, 1 year from now, we would have to, 8 months from now, we would have to start the process of advertising qualifications again. And that's a time consuming process from both the department standpoint and purchasing standpoint, which is why the blanket with an option to renew is a good balance. It allows us to satisfy the requirements of state law, select multiple vendors, and at the same time be efficient with our delivery of services.
Did they ever get the resolution numbers correct? Because on the background of this, it was some kind of confusion on the resolution numbers when they can use the services. I'm not aware of any problems. I'd be glad to discuss those with you separately if that's. Yeah, that'd be good.
It may be possible that they may have posted the prior resolution for these services just by way of background, just to help explain that this was something that had been previously awarded. Many times that's what the backup documentation will include.
Okay, we can go offline and I can ask you more questions because we got limited time. I appreciate it.
Certainly, be glad to do that.
All right, you good, Councilman?
Yes, sir.
Okay, any other questions concerning items under Public Works and Transportation? If not, would you pull up your purchasing questions or purchases for this evening and see if you have any questions concerning the 3 items that are listed for our consideration. Councilman Gilbert?
Yeah, I got one question on the second page, not the one we're going to vote on tonight, but the other page that came with it on the cleaning of the tunnel. I said it before, the lining that we spent so much money on is coming down. And do they have a way of putting it back up, or is it coming down? They said coming down because the trucks going through there, but there's so many places in there, it's higher up. And I never did get an answer for that as far as it's tearing. So the question is the company that we are giving this bid to, is it too rough or what? Or is cleaning it?
I'm not sure. When you say it's on page 2, I don't have but one page.
Well, it comes with, this is a 2-page. It tells you about the renewal of different contracts, like the first, second year, third year, fourth year. It was the second page.
Different tab, I think.
Right.
Okay.
Well, we can talk about it later because this is we can do it next week. Call Tony and ask him.
Yeah. Sometimes there's a different tab. I'd caught that tab a few weeks ago, and
Okay.
but that's what he's referring to.
Okay. And I tell you, maybe Mr. Payne could be prepared to answer that question next week in Public Works Committee.
Okay, that's good. That'd be good.
Okay. All right, council, if there's no other questions on our purchases, if you'll look on next week's agenda for November the 10th, are there any items on there that we need to discuss? Councilman Ledford.
Mr. Chairman, I will cover this in our Planning and Zoning Committee today, but item B under planning, I will be asking for a deferral. This is a complicated project, still with a lot of moving parts, including conversations and phone calls out with TDEC, much like I had on the last Shallowford Road project that I will be working through diligently, but I will be asking for a deferral and try to set the date as accurate as possible to get my answers. Thank you.
All right, very well. Thank you, sir. All right, council, if you would pull up future considerations and let me know if you have any questions under future considerations. Okay. All right, we have no departmental reports this afternoon. So at this time, with no other business to be discussed under regular agenda, I will turn the chair over to Councilman Ledford for planning and zoning. Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everybody to our Tuesday, November 3rd Planning and Zoning Committee meeting. Miss Lydia, will you go ahead and bring in Mr. John Bridger?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
While he's coming in, sir, do you want to approve the minutes or anything?
I would love to do that while Mr. Bridger is coming in. If I could get that approval motion, I would appreciate it.
So
Move to
moved.
approve.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bridger, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing fine.
Very good. So got a few items today for next week. And do you want to go ahead and, well, before we start, John, we're going to go ahead and we're going to have a briefing on the zoning code assessment progress at the end of this meeting, correct?
Sure, yes.
Okay, very good. Just to kind of bring us up to date as to where we are. So very good. Well, let's jump right in and get started with ordinances on first reading next week. Item 6A.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen.
Please.
Everybody see my screen? I'm trying to maximize.
Yeah, we've got it.
Okay, so this first request is a request to lift conditions. This is in the Hickson community as a condition that requires a particular location for an extension of a greenway. Essentially, they're relocating this to along the existing street. Actually, I'm going to show you the map. So you can see along Longview Drive. Originally, it was indicated along this alignment, and now it's being moved to along Longview Drive. So let me jump ahead. Sorry now. So staff looking at it felt like, again, since it's still maintaining that greenway connection, just moving it, staff did not have any concerns about it, recommended approval. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition. They concurred with staff's recommendation to approve the request.
That was fast. I know Councilman Smith is not here today, so let me go through and see in my participants. I don't see any hands, John. Does anybody have any questions on this case? Seeing none, we will move on to item B, please.
Okay. Okay, this is a request. This is in the Hamilton Place area off of Shallowford Road. Request to rezone a tract of land, a 13-acre tract from R1 and RTZ to RTZ and C2 commercial zone for a mixed-use development. Again, you see here the location. It's just east of the Gumbel Road intersection with Shallowford Road. It's about 13 acres in size. This is another location. You can see how the property is kind of in between some scenes between. You have some residential, single-family residential to the north. It also does abut a townhouse development along Rivendell Lane to the east, and you do have some commercial across the street to the south. Looking at the zoning, you already got some RTZ zoning along Rivendell Lane, immediately abutting this property to the east. You have R4 and C2 to the south and R1 zoning to the north. There is some recent history that Rivendell Lane development was rezoned back in 2004 with 2 conditions. One requiring a screening fence and a 20-foot buffer with some landscaping screening between that, as well as a requirement for all easements to be retained. And you see in 1998, the property to the east, or I should say to the west of this property, was rezoned to R4. Just a reminder, of course, we all know this, but R1 is your base single family zone that restricts most of uses just to single family with a few other institutional uses allowed. RTZ does allow for single family dwellings and townhouses. And then of course, C2, as we know, is your base zone for most commercial areas along commercial thoroughfares. That allows your retail. Again, as noted, the uses, you have a mix of uses in the area, townhouses to the east, you have single family to the north, assisted living to the west, and commercial office to the south. So it really is kind of like at a scene where you're trying to transition to that lower intensity residential development. There are no steep slopes or floodplains on this site. Looking at the Hamilton Place Community Plan, it recommends essentially medium density residential, which would be your single family homes, townhouses, patio homes, up to a density of about 4 dwelling units per acre. So staff felt like the RTZ request was appropriate for this location, though we did have concerns about approving the C2 across the street because we've been pretty consistent in maintaining C2 south of Shallowford Road and not on the north side. So based on that, the staff recommended to approve the RTZ zoning only, not the C2. There was opposition at the Planning Commission meeting. Some of the concerns expressed included flooding, the amount of density proposed, adding more commercial uses that might impact their residential neighborhoods. So based on the feedback from staff and hearing from the community and the applicant, Planning Commission concurred with staff's recommendation to approve just the RTZ, not the C2 that was requested by the applicant.
Thank you, John. This is in District 4, so I'll address a couple of issues on this. This is the case I just previously mentioned that we are still working through conditions. This actually came up by John. Was it back in February at Planning Commission? And we got
several times. You're right.
Yeah. There's some issues we're working through, including there are waters of the state on the property. There obviously a neighborhood. Now we're talking about with the component of C2, which is why, and I made the motion to go with staff recommendation because in this current retail market, seeing what's happening at the Hamilton Place, we're all watching the news, obviously. I was concerned about more retail type being able to sustain that in that area. So we did move to go with the staff recommendation. That being said, very much so want to work with the adjacent property owners. They've presented a list of conditions that we're working through. That process, I imagine, will take probably another 30 days because of some conversations I'm having on my end with TDEC. And if you remember the last time I had dealt with TDEC, we started something in June and finally got an answer and just recently passed that legislation. So it's going to take a little bit of time. So that's where the deferral will come in. But that's all I have to add on that, is making sure that people know that we'll be asking for a deferral next week and working with adjacent property owners in addressing their conditions. This does lie in between an R1 and an RTZ, so I want to make sure that we have as much transitional conditions as possible and we satisfy as much as we can. John, will you talk real quick though? You mentioned that this property is not in a floodplain, but properties around it do report quite a bit of flooding, and that's one of my concerns, and that's one of the reasons that I'm working with TDEC and getting some questions answered, because mitigation of water is extremely, extremely important to me, and then protecting as much as we can through the buffering, through lighting, whatever conditions that we finally arrive at. But that conversation is ongoing, and I appreciate the council entertaining a motion next week for a deferral. Thank you. John, let's go on to, I did not see any questions, by the way, in the box. So let's go on to item C, please.
Okay. This is a request property from R1 to R2. Property is currently vacant to basically build a new duplex. As I understand, I think this is one of the properties where the home was destroyed by the tornado or had some damage. So they wanted to rebuild this vacant site for a duplex. To give you a kind of, again, location, you see on your kind of the upper left-hand part of the screen, Gumbarrel Road, East Brainerd. So this is just east of the East Brainerd Gumbarrel Road intersection. You see the former East Brainerd Elementary School sitting right here. Again, this is off of Meadowview Lane. Meadowlark Lane, sorry.
Yep.
So looking at the zoning, this whole block is zoned R1. The only R2 currently in the area you see is just to the southeast along East Brainerd Road, but this entire, most of the properties on the street are zoned R1. There has been no recent rezoning history in this immediate area. As I indicated before, the land use is all single-family residential on the street currently. Looking at the Hamilton Place Community Plan, it recommends low to medium density residential for the site, which would be single-family, two-family, or townhouses. I think what staff took note of, as you know, we're in the middle of a area planning process, getting ready to kick off for this area. This street could be appropriate for possibly a duplex, but we haven't gone through the public process yet. And so staff was concerned about taking an action to start basically dramatically changing the zoning and the future direction of the street without having gone through the planning process first. So we recommended to deny. There was no opposition at Planning Commission. After hearing from the applicant and the staff, Planning Commission concurred with staff's recommendation to deny the request as a recommendation.
Thank you, John. This one is also in District 4. So over the past month since Planning Commission, I visited Meadowlark and was able to shoot a few more hoops down there at the end of the cul-de-sac and talk with at least one of the neighbors adjacent. And I'm going to have to go along with the staff recommendation on this because number one, it introduces a spot zone. It introduces a new zone. John, you correctly picked up on the Area 11 plan. Do I see that area remaining R1 as we move forward through the public process in the Area 11 plan? No, I really don't. I think more density is definitely going to be required there. I think this is just bad timing for this particular, I mean, they could still build back a single family home there, but I think this adds a level of complexity to the Area 11 plan that we're about to kick off. So I'm going to leave that there, but I do support what the staff and what Planning Commission had presented at the meeting.
Okay.
All right. I do not see any hands on that item, John. So let's move on to D, please.
Okay. This is a request. This is in the Highland Park community, a request to, actually not Highland Park. This is south of, this is along, if you know where the Armory is, along Holtzclaw, right across the street from it. They're wanting to rezone from R2 and M1 to R1 for basically a residential development. Here you can see the site. You can see Montague Park kind of over to the far left. The Armory is sitting right here. So Main Street is a little bit up to the top of your screen. This is on 18th Street. They're wanting to basically rezone this to accommodate that residential development. You can see the zoning at this location. It's a mix of R2 and M1. So again, I don't think staff had an issue with residential use at this location. I think the concern was downzoning all the way to R1 when you're along a major corridor, South Holtzclaw, where you have manufacturing across the street. So there was no recent rezoning history at this location. If you look again,
grapes or apples.
Am I hearing something? Okay. That you see, you have the Armory across the street. You do have single-family residential on either side of the street, where the neighborhood is. The recently adopted Historic River to Ridge Area Plan recommends industrial hybrid at this location because it's along that corridor, that Holtzclaw corridor. So staff recommended to approve R2 instead of R1. basically still allows them to do this, the residential development. It just accommodates a bit more intensity along that corridor. Because if you got, particularly if you got manufacturing across the street, over time that corridor is going to intensify. So going down to R1 would not be consistent with the plan recommendation or vision to, allow that to become more intense over time. So again, we recommended R2. There was no opposition at PC. The applicant had an opportunity to speak relative to the staff recommendation. My understanding, they were fine with the recommendation of R2 because it still allowed them to do their single family dwelling. So Planning Commission concurred with staff's recommendation to basically approve R2 instead of R1 for that location.
Very good. Councilman Byrd, do you want to chime in? Is he with us? I see he's muted and offline. So John, I don't see any other hands on this case. Will you, and can you tell us real briefly on this one, why you wouldn't go with R3?
You actually, you could, I'll say the difference, I know with R2, it has that exception for accommodating smaller lot sizes more so than R3. R3 has some additional buffer requirements that R2 would not. So I would say R2 gives you a little more flexibility in terms of lot size than R3 does.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Councilman Byrd, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and I had no issues with that one, Councilman Lefford. Everything is pretty much okay with that. No pushback.
Very good. Appreciate you chiming in, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. John, let's move on to item E, please.
Sure. Okay. This is a request. This is in the Highland Park community. This is a request to rezone attractive land from R1 to UGC for a multi-unit residential development across 2 parcels. You can here see the site. It's on the 1500 block of East 13th. You see Main Street to the south. You can see South Highland Park Avenue running right along adjacent to the site with some industrial across the street. You can see Holtzclaw further to the left. The zoning in this area is mostly R1. You're starting to see some RTZ zones, and that's for some of those infill developments you recall seeing over the past few months where you've had some RTZ requests for some smaller lot residential infill. You do have one UGC that was approved several months ago at the corner of Holly and 12th Street. The land use, as I mentioned before, you got mostly single family on this block. You do have warehousing across the street to the west. If you look at the historic River Ridge plan, it does support urban residential at this location. So that basically accommodates up to four units per lot. This is one of those areas where we're wanting to see a little bit of intensification, but not too much. So you could do something like an RTZ. Staff, really, we didn't have an issue with the land use proposed. I think they're wanting to do 4 units for each lot. But to be able to accommodate that concept, they need the UGC zone, which gives them a little more flexibility in terms of minimum lot size to accommodate that number of units per lot. So staff, and looking at it, again, we had concerns about approving UGC at this location. So we recommended to deny. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition. At Planning Commission, felt like the development concept was appropriate based on the adopted land use policy. They essentially recommended some conditions to help him in that UGC, so it would not be the full-blown UGC with all the other uses, but have some constraints. So they recommend approval subject to 5 conditions. One, that it'll be residential uses only. You can see they're retaining that one existing single-family residence on the property, no more than 4 units per lot, rear parking only with alley access, and a maximum height of 35 feet.
Very good. Councilman Byrd, do you have any comments you'd like to share on this?
Not at this moment, Councilman Lefford. I'm gonna do a little bit more research on it with the community, but I haven't received any pushback from this one as well. And I'll be in touch with John on some things probably here in the future, but thank you, Councilman.
Yes, sir. John, let me bring up real quick the text amendment that we voted on last week. Had that been in place before Planning Commission, would we be going to the what feels like the all-encompassing UGC now?
I would say the only issue they have with this is their lot size is still below that 7,000 square feet lot. So they would need to combine the lots. They wouldn't get as many units. And remember, we based that minimum lot size on what we're already doing in form-based code for the RA zone. We had that RA zone in the form-based code, and it has a minimum lot size for doing 4 units of I think it's 7,000 or 7,500 square feet. So we based that standard for RTZ to match up with the, and we didn't feel like it'd be appropriate to be more intensive than what the form-based code was recommending around the downtown.
Sure, that makes sense.
So the short answer is they would need to combine lots to make that RTZ work.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, good old UGC, huh?
That's right.
Our new C2.
You know, you can see the site. That's the site plan there. The concept. That's the property question. Okay.
Very good. I don't see any other hands on this item, so let's move on to item F, please.
Sure. This is a request to rezone a property. This is located in the Avondale community from R1 to R2 for a 2-family dwelling. It's an existing, I want to mention, this is an existing duplex that's currently vacant on the site. Give you a location. You can see Wilcox Boulevard to the south of this property. This is 1 block north of Wilcox at the intersection of Wheeler and Camden Street. You can see the predominant zoning of this area is currently R1. You do have one little R2 off of Arlington Avenue. And just as a reminder, I think back in 2004, when the Avondale neighborhood plan was adopted, a lot of this area was downzoned to R1. This is one of those parcels that was downzoned. If you look at the existing uses around this area, it's all on this block is single family residential. This is the only duplex structure on this block. The recently adopted Historic River to Ridge plan recommends urban residential with a single family overlay or restriction, which basically says we're trying to promote single family or ADUs in this area, but not multifamily. So staff recommended to deny just based on the Historic River to Ridge plan recommendation for single family for this block. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition. I think Planning Commission took into consideration not only the plan recommendation, but the fact that this was an existing vacant duplex structure. And because there was no opposition, they recommended to approve. And I'm going to leave it there. Any questions from council?
John, I'm not seeing any hands. Let me scroll down there. I don't think Councilwoman Coonrod is not with us, but let me recap a little bit on this case because you might draw a comparison to the case we just talked about in District 4. And the similarity only is in the R2 request. This was, first of all, had a zoning history. Number one. Number two, it already is an existing abandoned structure versus a vacant lot. This was triggered, you said, this is triggered by the EPB 100-day power disconnect, which is also a considering factor. I had asked if the applicant, and I do not know this, and we will hopefully find out, had able to contact Councilwoman Coonrod to get her opinion and to let her know what is going on. But this is an abandoned structure. And I think there's a big difference because this zone was introduced at one time or has a zoning history in this case. So if you're trying to draw a little bit of comparison to that, the case in District 4, there's a couple of similarity, or the only one similarity, but a lot of differences too. I do not see any other hands if anybody wants to comment on this case. If not, John, we will move on to item G, please.
Okay. This is a request. This is also the Avondale community to rezone from R1 to RTZ for a 2-unit development. You can see this property is located in the 2500 block of Ocoee Street. The zoning in this area is currently R1. You do see C2 at the intersection of Ocoee and North Chamberlain Avenue. No recent history for this location. You see the single family, again, the predominant use is single family residential. Again, in this area, I would say the distinction here compared to the last case, this area is recommended for the urban residential place type. So again, there's not that single family restriction like we just talked about. So the RTZ is clearly in line with the recommendation of the adopted plan for allowing for some variety of housing types up to 4 units per lot. So staff, after reviewing, looking at the request and the plan recommendations, felt like it was appropriate, recommended to approve. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition. Planning Commission concurred with staff's recommendation to approve.
Very good. John, I'm seeing no hands on this case, so we will move on to our last item.
Okay.
Which is a resolution for
Yes.
a special exceptions permit, otherwise known as a PUD.
That's right. It's a request for a PUD in Lookout Valley area for a residential development consisting of 31 residential units for an overall density of about 1.5 units per acre. This is located just off of I-24 as part of the Black Creek development, getting close to the state line. This is basically another extension of that development. The current zoning of this area is RTZ, residential townhouse lot line zone. So the base density in RTZ is 12 units per acre. And in 2013, this site was rezoned from R1 to R3, subject to a PUD approval. Later on in 2017, it was downzoned from R3 to RTZ. Okay, so it does have some history of multi-unit type zoning or more intense zoning in this location. If you look at the uses, you have single-family detached uses to the north and to the west of this location. The Lookout Valley Land Use Plan recommends low-density residential for this location, which includes 1 to 4 units per acre. So the density is within that range recommended by the Lookout Valley Land Use Plan. There are some slope features on this at this location that we need to be mindful of. And if I'm going to kind of jump to the plan, you can see where they've kind of basically located the road and the lots kind of along the ridge line, and you do have some significant open space that's being dedicated along the eastern boundary and the northern boundary of this site. So based on that, staff recommend to approve. There was no opposition at Planning Commission, and Planning Commission concur with staff's recommendation to approve.
Very good. I'm going to give an opportunity for the chairman to jump in if he would like to. I think he was out of the country at the Planning Commission time. Chairman, do you have any comments you'd like to add?
Other than John, this is characteristic of the surroundings of this community, correct? I mean,
that is correct.
It's my understanding it's all in keeping. There's several PUD developments in and around this location and part of the plan of the Black Creek community.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. All right, John, that wasn't too painful today on election day. So why don't you go ahead and give us a briefing on the zoning code assessment progress. We had a great meeting. I know a couple of us with the folks from Camrose, and that was very enlightening. I think they were very appreciative of some of the energy and input that we were able to provide. So why don't you go give us a little bit of an update from that point?
Sure. Yeah, they're wrapping up their stakeholder meetings. I think they got one more week to finish those up. So I know they've been meeting with some of the engineers. I think they got a builders meeting coming up soon. I appreciate you all that you've already spent time with them. Some of you have already met with them. So I would say their stakeholder interview process will be wrapping up probably sometime by the end of next week. And then based on those interviews, they'll begin putting together kind of like a draft overview of kind of an assessment of the code based on, again, how our zoning compares to other places. So once we have that kind of draft report together, we'll be coming back to you all as a council to kind of get some of your initial reactions to that draft report before it's finished. So I would think that's probably sometime in the early next year when that'll happen. But we'll keep you posted as those stakeholder interviews progress. We also just want to bring this to you, so I haven't forgotten, the revegetative standard proposal for steep slopes.
You beat me to it, John.
They are looking at that. We expect to have a draft for them next week of their report on that. So we want to give time for our LDO staff to look at that and give some comments. As you know, we're also going to be looking at some target sites to assess kind of what compliance with that looks like. So as soon as we get their draft report, we'll be going to work on the compliance side of it in terms of what that looks like using some test sites. So I think we should shoot for, I think, that Planning and Zoning Committee meeting in December, Councilman, to kind of give you kind of a more of a formal report on that. But they are getting that report to us next week. I want to report.
That's good news. I was going to add that in my interview with them, we talked a little bit about that, and they were actually quite enamored with the idea, something that they have not seen, and had a few questions, I think, mathematically that we were going to walk through, but might even be something that could be modeled in other places, was their initial opinion. And so I applaud this council for walking it to this point. And Councilman Mitchell, thank you for keeping on the tracks for this, because you've been very instrumental and inspirational in keeping this thing going, and I appreciate that very much. I do see one hand. Councilman Gilbert, you have a comment, sir?
I got a question for John since we're at the end. John, when are we going, the planning for my area, for the, I think the 58 area, when are we going to start it? I know that we're behind because of COVID, but what is the plan?
But tell you, we are, Justin Turson is the lead planner for that project. He is actually working on some initial analysis. He was going to actually talk to me about maybe going and setting up a meeting with you to just kind of get your initial take on some of the issues in your area. So they are literally crunching numbers as we speak. For the Area 11 plan, we're very close to finishing up the first phase of that, and that's kind of like the technical analysis. So we will be, I think that's probably could also target Councilman for our December Planning and Zoning Committee. We can kind of give you a high level overview of some of the key findings in that report. So anyway, so I would say Area 10, which is Councilman Gilbert's area plan. I would say your next step, Councilman Gilbert, is for you to have a chance to meet with our project lead. So I'll set that up so y'all can kind of talk a little bit about just kind of what you observe as some of the issues in that area as an introduction for him. And then I think for Area 11, we'll be doing some kind of a council briefing. I would like to shoot for that first Tuesday in December to give y'all just an overview of some of the key findings from that study.
Okay, and one more thing. I know I ask you all the time about urban, and where is the boundary line of urban as far as zoning?
If you're referring to the urban overlay, then that brings up another favorite topic for Councilman Mitchell. I'm happy to report that
you got the corrected map.
We worked with City Attorney's Office. I believe that is up and running now. Is that correct, Phil?
Yes, Maria's put that request to the Muni Code folks. Yes,
that is. We can check that box. But just as a quick reminder, when we say the urban overlay, it's really a zoning tool that helps us understand where there are, I call the more urban development patterns. When I say urban development patterns, what I mean by that is you got a block and grid system. We have typically have small blocks and alleys. And so what that urban overlay does is give greater flexibility on lot sizes and parking standards, because it's understanding that that area has a different kind of street network and lot configuration compared to the rest of the city. So if I were to draw you a general picture, that will be a Missionary Ridge to the east, the base of Lookout Mountain to the west, the Georgia line to the south, and it covers parts of north Chattanooga, and follows right along a little bit of Riverview. Again, just those properties that front along Hickson Pike.
You said Missionary Ridge to the east?
Missionary Ridge is the eastern boundary, so it doesn't go across.
But it stays on
across Missionary Ridge.
So how far up it goes from the east for Missionary Ridge?
It goes. If you follow, you mean going north? It does not. It follows along East Chattanooga, but it does not get into. I'm trying to remember some of those neighborhoods. I can send you a map.
Yeah, let's pick that conversation up offline.
I appreciate it.
Yep, thank you, sir. So, Councilman Mitchell, if you don't mind, will you double check Phil and John's work on that map? That would be perfect. Thank you, sir.
Glad to. Thank you for your efforts, John and Phil.
And then,
thank you for the reminder.
Real quick, John, will you tell us? You mentioned the name Justin Tierson. Some of us are more familiar with that name than others, but sure. Justin is back with the city.
That's right. He's been with RPA since I would say late spring of this year. Right. He's the project lead for that, and Sarah Cook is the project lead for the Area 11 plan for Councilman Ledford and in Councilman Ledford's district.
Okay, just because I know in Planning Commission we've seen Justin wearing a different hat with a non-city hat, and now he's back with the city. For those of you who might remember him, so we're glad to have him back. Very good. Chairman, I don't see anything else on our agenda for planning and zoning unless anybody has any specific topics they'd like to cover. And if that's the case, then if we don't have an attorney-client privilege meeting today, let me know. And if not, I will adjourn us until 4 o'clock. I'll turn it back over to you.
I think we are adjourned until 4.
Thank you very much, everybody.
See everybody back at 4.